When we look at that graph and the exponential decline of church attendance that's even now ravaging evangelical congregations, what's happening here on a macro level? Is there one thing that we can point to and say that is the biggest single factor that's involved?
All right, so let me point to here's three categories. One category is stuff that's going on inside the church.
Mm-hmm.
Another category is history, and a third category is basically cultural shifts, which would also relate to there's some overlap between cultural shifts and history. Let me go kind of one by one of each of those three things, because they're all in complex ways at the same time, all influencing, I think, what we're seeing in the data. So, but let me start with the history piece. When America was at its height of being churched, roughly 70% of Americans went to church on a regular basis in the 1970s. And things began to trail off a little bit from there, but not by much. A couple, percent here, percent there, year over year. But then things really started to pick up in the kind of their decline in the late 80s, and really kind of picked up in the early mid 90s. And so what happened there, one key event historically, was the collapse of the Soviet Union. Up until that point, we had to be American was to be Christian in some ways. When somebody said, growing up for me, I'm 41. When somebody said, "Yeah, I'm not a Christian," it wasn't uncommon to for somebody to ask you, "Are you a communist?" Because the
are you now, or have you ever been a communist?
Yeah, the great enemy of the United States was the godless atheists of the Soviet Union, and there's a reason why politically we had "In God We Trust" added to our money, and added "Under God" to our Pledge of Allegiance in the 1950s. All of these things were a response to the rise of communism. And so with the collapse of the Soviet Union in the early 90s, then to be American, well, oftentimes you identify yourself sometimes, we are not these other people, and so that became less clear on, what are Americans not. And then a decade later, you have the people that, ran the two airplanes into, the Twin Towers and into the Pentagon. And now the enemy is religious fundamentalists. And, during the same time, you have the rise of first the internet, and then high-speed internet, and then here's some things that have happened in the last 30 years. Students now have advantages over teachers because of access to the internet.
Right.
You had the rise of the new atheism in the early part of this millennium. You had Y2K, bowling alone, the Spotlight report on the Boston diocese, and then the revelations in the decades to come that this isn't just a Roman Catholic issue. We had the Great Recession, smartphones, ubiquitous porn, the end of the Cold War, Gene Robinson, our decadent era that Ross Douthat talks about. Just think about the music of the early 90s. You had, I think, perhaps the single most prophetic song lyric in "Smell Like Teen Spirit." Here we are, now entertain us. You have the whole movement of people who are good without God. You have the rise of expressive individualism. The like button is created in 2009. Obergefell, Columbine, mass shootings. I mean, all of these, George Floyd, we can go, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, you could go ad infinitum on all of these different things. These are massive shifts that just change how, and for different people, there's different inflection points for the things that just kind of resonate for them, or when, a flip gets, a switch gets flipped. But from a historical standpoint, though, I do think that the collapse of the Soviet Union and 9/11, and then combined with the internet. So think about this. When I was growing up in the early mid 90s, how people were largely formed and shaped were through mediating institutions,
Right.
education, local church, all real life, your neighbors, going to, I played basketball 3 hours a day, after
Mm.
school every day, at the pickup games at the basketball court. It's like
Yeah.
I grew up outside and offline. And so, but how are people being formed and shaped today? Largely, it's more through their information diet than anything else. And that's an
Right.
unconscious, subconscious process. And so little of that is in real life. Institutions, trust in institutions are eroding. And, people are making, growing audiences by liquidating trust in those institutions. And of course, they're doing it all through the internet. And so the internet has really complicated the ways in which people are formed and shaped as humans.